Our lesson today is taken from the Gospel according to Luke, chapter 18, verses 9 through 14. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. Two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give a tenth of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted. Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Well, I don't want to traumatize anyone with this sermon, so this is a trigger warning if you're a Phillies fan. Okay. The Phillies were eliminated from the playoffs. In the elimination game where they had to win or their season would be over, they're tied with the Dodgers, and a ball is hit back to the pitcher and it hits his foot, and he kind of panics and picks it up, and the catcher is pointing, throw it to first base, throw it to first base. The pitcher instead throws it home, misses by a mile. The winning run scores, their season ends. And of course, he was disconsolate at that point. Now, what did his team do? His teammates came over to him to console him. The manager used a cliche that's common in sports, but in the press conference, the manager gives that old cliche of, look, we win as a team, we lose as a team. But they also asked the manager, what did you say to him? What did you say to that player? And it wasn't just like, oh, it's okay, or oh, we forgive you, because, we forgive you is almost condescending, all right? Oh, yes, we're willing to overlook it. The manager, what he said to him was, look, we wouldn't have gotten here without you. You won a lot of games for us, and you're going to win games for us next year. All right? He reminded the pitcher of all the good that he had done. He reminded him of all that he brought to the team. He reminded him of why he was on the team in the first place. And that is what a good leader does. That is what a good teammate does. They don't talk about the mistake. They talk about what he brought to the team. All right? And that is how you form a good team. That is what keeps a good team. And one of the things in this passage is this reminder that we have to remember that we are all on the same team. And when your teammate messes up, you don't just say it's okay or try to fix it, but instead you remind them of why they're on the team. You remind them of the value that they bring to the team. This is what it means to be a good teammate or a good team leader. The lead characters in this story that Jesus tells are not seeing that they're on the same team. It starts, right? Jesus tells the story. He says, two men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector, which sounds like the start of a bad joke. A Pharisee and a tax collector go to pray. But you need to remember the context here, which is that in the modern Christian world, we have learned, and in many ways wrongly so, to think of the Pharisee as a bad person. Okay? The Pharisees get so negatively portrayed in the Gospels that our association with Pharisee is negative. All right? You don't want to be called a Pharisee, especially in Christian circles. But we need to remember that in the context of his time, when Jesus is telling this story, their association is Pharisee good, tax collector bad. The tax collector bad part is kind of universal throughout millennia, but the Pharisee good part is something we need to remember in the context of this story, okay? So when Jesus tells it, he's expecting that the people are hearing, oh, Pharisee good, tax collector bad. And the Pharisee prays this prayer where he says, God, I thank you that I am not like other people. Now, this was not an unusual prayer in that time. And in fact, about 100 years later, in the 2nd century, in the Talmud, it gets edited in a way that is still said by Orthodox Jewish males today in their daily prayer. All right? Orthodox Jewish males to this day will pray this, and we have to unpack it because it's not a great prayer, but it's a prayer that's repeated 3 times with a different word at the end each time, and it goes like this. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has not made me a Gentile. Blessed are you, Lord God, ruler of the universe, who has not made me a slave. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has not made me a woman. Now, I'm not recommending this prayer, okay? It's difficult to say. But one of the questions is it redeemable? Because that's a question that gets asked of the Orthodox. How do you say this prayer today in our context, in our nation? All right, how do you redeem this prayer? And I remember reading this rabbi who was writing about it and what has happened in terms of trying to transform the understanding of this prayer. Is the rabbi wrote this. He says, this blessing calls me to recommit to building a world where inequality and oppression do not exist. Okay? See, whenever we thank God for something, there is a flip side to it. When you thank God for food, when you're really saying also, thank God I'm not hungry. When you thank God for material blessings that you've received in your life, there's a flip side in that you are thanking God that you're not poor. All right? So there's always that flip side that's kind of there and is going to be heard and is sort of implied. Whenever you thank God for privilege, you are thanking God that you don't lack that privilege. And so in this prayer, how it's being redeemed in the Orthodox community is to remember this prayer as a reminder of the privilege that they have, all right? And the responsibility to use that privilege to lift up those who don't have that privilege. And that idea, is around in popular culture thanks to the immortal words of Peter Parker's Uncle Ben, with great power comes great responsibility. All right. This is the modern interpretation of that Orthodox prayer. Not only to accept the responsibility, but be grateful for it. In the modern Orthodox world, they are interpreting this prayer to say, I am grateful for the responsibility because it gives me the opportunity. The privilege that I've been given gives me the opportunity to do more good in the world. It gives me the opportunity to do more what they call mitzvot, good deeds. It gives me that opportunity, that calling to do more for the world. And they're grateful. And we should be grateful for the opportunity to do more. Whenever we think of the privileges that we have, and in our society that is filled with inequity of different kinds, we have different kinds of privilege. No matter who we are, we'll have privilege in some areas and lack privilege in other areas. And wherever we have privilege, we are called to use that privilege to lift up those who lack it, rather than just say, oh, I'm better than people because I have the privilege. It's an opportunity to lift others up. But the Pharisee sees it differently. See, he says this, he goes, I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. And these things are highlighted because what he's doing is he's going over and above. The requirement was that they would fast once a week, but just in case, he's gonna do it twice. And when this phrase has to be unpacked when he says, I give 1/10 of all my income in the English is a little bit off base from what it says in the Hebrew, because in the Hebrew it's more, I give 1/10 of all that comes in. Now, what's the difference between all my income and all that comes in? Well, there was a requirement, all right, that, like, for example, a farmer would tithe from their wheat, from their harvest, okay? So you're a farmer, you have the harvest, and you were supposed to tithe the wheat that came in. What he was counting as all that came in included what he bought. And the reason why he was tithing what he bought was in case the farmer didn't. Right? He had no assurance, oh, gee, I bought, I bought the wheat. How do I know the farmer properly tithed from his harvest before he sold it to me? So just in case, I'm going to tithe off what I bought. So all my income was all that comes in. It included his purchases. I mean, can you imagine if you were a part of a religious tradition with mandatory tithing? There are a few denominations like that. And you said, well, I'm going to tithe what I pay my plumber in case my plumber fails to tithe on their income. Okay? That's the equivalent of what he's doing. He is going so far over and above. And by the way, this is a parable, so it's a hypothetical story, okay? He's going so far over and above because he wants to ensure that he is righteous. In other words, he's looking at this situation and being focused solely on himself. He wants to be blameless. He's not doing what that rabbi I quoted is doing and interpreting the prayer as a call to help others. Instead, what he's doing is trying to make sure that he can say that he is blameless. The tax collector takes the opposite view. The tax collector says, look, be merciful to me, a sinner. The tax collector sees his faults. The tax collector sees that he's standing at the bottom. And all he can do is rely on God. And this might be our prayer, except that we need to remember that at this point in the story, Jesus has not yet died and been raised. All right? And for us, as followers of the risen Christ, we don't need to be worried about whether God is going to be merciful to us even though we are sinners, because Jesus came to assure us of God's mercy. All right? So that is no longer our worry. We don't need to wonder if God will be merciful to us. We can rest assured of this. But that assurance doesn't excuse us from the responsibility to live into that assurance, to live up to that assurance, because with great forgiveness also comes great responsibility. With the forgiveness God has shown us, we have this responsibility to lift others up. But Jesus said the purpose of this parable, of telling the story, was because they were telling the story to those who regarded others with contempt. Your execution of that responsibility to others is going to begin with what you see in others. What do you see in others? Do you see their faults? Or do you see what they're good at? What would you want others to see in you? Right. About 25 years ago, became introduced because it really swept through church world. It was a book called Strength Finder, which now has a version 2.0 that came from the Gallup organization. And you may not know that you may know Gallup as a polling organization, but the bulk of their business is actually management consulting. All right, and their data gathering, their surveying was actually a strength that came out of their data gathering prowess, all right, as they were doing research on behalf of companies in their management consulting. And what they came up with was this thing called Strengths Finder. Now, the way it started was this. They were trying to figure out, what is it that makes people successful in the first place? Why are people successful? So they did like 20,000 interviews with people who were just referred to them or regarded as successes in all kinds of different fields, all right? So they interviewed like these 20,000 people, and the first thing that it came out as was a book. Just no metrics, no measurement, just a book of anecdotes around this. And the title of that book was First Break All the Rules. Because that was actually one of the things they found was a very common trait among the successful, was the willingness to break rules. Which means that a lot of you parents are going, wow, is my kid going to be great? But they eventually quantified it. And they broke it down to like 34 traits. And traits are not like skills. It's not like having perfect pitch as a musician or something like that. These traits were ways you move in the world, ways that motivate you, ways you think about the world, okay? And you take the assessment and they would give you your top 5. And what churches were doing is they were making all their people, all their key leaders take the assessment, and then they would actually see how it was matching up with what they were assigned to do. For example, one of mine was competition. And what it's defined as is, if you want me to do better, keep score. So I was always like that. Back in the day when I was playing tennis, how many of you played tennis or used to play tennis or anything? How many of you were, I just want to go with a friend to a court and just hit the ball back and forth? Just rally. And then other people, so I'd go with a friend and be like, let's just rally. And I'd be like, no, let's play a game. No, let's just rally. No, let's play a game. Because I'm not going to play my hardest unless we're keeping score. Because that's one of my top 5. And the philosophy behind this is, I'm taking these quotes from the intro to the book by one of the authors, a man named Tom Rath. And he wrote this. He said, "We were tired of living in a world that revolved around fixing our weaknesses. Society's relentless focus on people's shortcomings had turned into a global obsession." The relentless focus on shortcomings is a huge problem in our world. One of the examples that they give is, you're a parent, your kid comes home with a report card, gets an A- in one subject, gets a C in the other. The parent starts to freak out about the C. And the whole strength finder mentality is, no, forget about the C, focus on the A-, because that's where your kid's good. That's what they're good at. All right? Push that, move that, motivate that, enable that. Let them keep developing in the area where they're good. Stop focusing on what they're not good at. They're not good at it. So live with that. That's fine. We don't all have to be good at everything. Focus on what they're good at. Okay? And when you focus on what they're not good at, it's very demotivating. It's very demoralizing. It's very frustrating. And when you look at some of these skills that people have, it's funny how in certain areas it comes naturally to us to understand it. And in so many other areas in life, we have such difficulty understanding it. For example, I'm going to pick on my friend Christian here. I didn't tell him I'm going to do this, so I'm going to pick on him. Great baritone. Why aren't you a tenor? Okay? All right? Everyone sit there and go, that's a stupid question. That's a stupid question. Why aren't you a tenor? It's like, well, he's not. He's a great baritone. But if you ask that question, how does he feel? His gifts as a baritone have been diminished. It's insulting. It sounds like it's not valued. Okay? Because I'm not talking about what he's good at. I'm talking about what he just isn't, because that's not how he was made. And the Strengths Finder assessment is based entirely on the idea that these traits that they're measuring are ways in which you were just made as a person. And you focus on the ways we were made strong. And so he continues in the intro, he says, what's more, we had discovered that people have several times more potential for growth when they invest energy in developing their strengths instead of correcting their deficiencies. Your strength is your potential. And yet the global obsession with deficiency leads to the number one question they get asked after the assessment is, how can I find out my bottom 5? And their answer is like, you did not read the book, did you? Okay? This is the whole point. Stop worrying about your bottom 5. Stop worrying about numbers 6 through 10. Stop worrying about it. Worry about your top 5 and push forward with those 5, because that's what matters. All right? I refuse to focus on deficiencies. I won't do it. It's not who I am, it's not how I lead, and it's not motivating to people. It does not lift up their gifts and their talents. All right? You talk to people in terms of what they're good at. You talk to people in terms of their strengths. What they will tell you from a management consulting perspective is simply this. If a person's job description says they have to do A, B, C, and D, and they're good at A, B, and C, and they're not good at D, give D to someone else. Don't send them to D school, okay? Don't send them to remedial D training. Give D to someone else, because you will get more out of that person by saying, hey, you're good at A, B, and C. Just do more of that. Focus on that. That's your giftedness. That's your strength. Do A, B, and C. Keep pushing on A, B, and C. We'll give D to someone else, because there's someone who's good at D, who loves D, who enjoys that. We'll let them do that. And maybe that's a person, in an ideal world, that's a person who's struggling with A, and they're like, oh, we're going to give you double A duty, and they get to have D. All right? Because that is what we should be looking for. We should be looking for strength. That is how you motivate. That is how you move people forward. And when you see the strengths in the people around you, that will actually change you. That will change the way you see people around you. All right? Think about all the work that's been done around persons who are neurodivergent or persons with disabilities, right? A big part of that is transforming our attitude from looking at what they cannot do to looking at what they can do, looking at where their strength is, right? That is the real change that needs to happen. Jesus tells the story and says, all who humble themselves will be exalted. And humility is not denying your strength. That's a false humility. You're not humble when you deny what you're good at. You're good at it. And you're all good at something. You're all good at more than one thing. You're all good at multiple things. It's false humility to sit there and say, oh, no, really. No. Own it. Don't be falsely humble. But the question is, what do you see in others? Do you choose to look at others simply through the measurement you apply to yourself and say, oh, I'm really good at this, and they're not? That is looking at others with contempt. But rather, a healthy humility, a non-self-deprecating humility, is rooted in seeing the strengths that other people have. That's the humility that we need to have. Because when you sit there and you look around a room and you sit there and say, hey, you know, I'm really good at X. And that person's really good at Y. And that person's really good at Z. Okay? That's a healthy humility. You're owning what you're good at, and what you're choosing to see in others is what they are good at. And then you lift that up. You encourage them in that. You move them forward in that. And that's a healthy humility that is helpful for everyone. And when you do that, when you live that way, when that is the way you approach others, you will be exalted. You know, when you look closely at it, he didn't say exalted by God, he just said exalted. And I believe that when you become the person who has that healthy humility of encouragement, the healthy humility of seeing the giftedness and the strengths in everyone, the humility to say, hey, let's try and reposition everything so that people are operating in what they're good at, and we're not going to worry about correcting deficiencies, we're going to worry about lifting up strengths, you will be exalted, especially by those who've gone through life with their strengths having been overlooked. There are so many people out there who are just being told, you need to correct a deficiency, you need to correct a deficiency, you need to correct a deficiency, and they're demoralized and discouraged rather than being elevated by allowing them to live into their strengths. What are they good at? We've all been gifted by God with ways to be strong. And when you choose to see that in others, they will appreciate it. You will, in fact, be exalted for being the person who saw in them the strength that maybe they didn't even know they have. Because I'll tell you this, no one needs another critic. We all do a pretty good job of it for ourselves. We don't need another critic in our lives. What we need are strength finders. What we need are people who will see one another for the strengths that they have, so that we can all own it, live into it, and together become the kind of healthy community that seeks to lift everyone up, that seeks to lift people up. Because when people talk about ending oppression, ending inequality, sometimes that takes the tone of condescension. Oh, let me help the poor person at the bottom. And that's an unhealthy way to achieve equality. The healthy equality is born of seeing their worth, of seeing their strength, of seeing their dignity, and saying, what I want to do is unlock that. I want to encourage that. I want to unleash that. And I want to do that for everyone. So we don't need more critics. We need more strength finders. We need to be the people who go out in the world and see everyone around us as someone with a strength to contribute. And then we figure out, how do we unlock that? How do we unleash that? And then we will all be exalted. Amen.